Well, Kate, can I have the next slide, please? Does anybody recognise this fruit? It's not a tomato. Anyone recognise it? A who? Bush cherry. No. I think it might be related. They about this big. They're called wax jumbos, if I've got the pronunciation right. Is anybody? Well, you may not know what it's called because even I'm not too sure. But have you ever tasted one? They are similar to the bush. What did you call it? The bush cherry. Bush cherry, which comes off lily police. So the challenge would be to try and describe the flavour to you. It's a little bit like a bush cherry. A little bit has a crunch of an apple. They leave a very dry taste in your mouth. But there's no way that I could really describe the flavour to you. The best way that I could get you to experience it is to say, here, taste one. Which I can't do because I gave all that we had left to my brother to give to his chooks. Because I wasn't too keen, and neither was my family too keen on the flavour. But you might love them. And you won't know unless you try them yourself. We ended up putting them in the fridge so they were nice and cool, and that was probably the best thing about them, is they'd be cold and refreshing as you bit into this fruit. But it was quite exotic. The lady who I was buying some plants off her on Facebook Marketplace, and she said she's got these, did I want to buy some? And I said, they look great. Yes. Good experience, but I don't know if I'd buy them a second time. But anyway, in today's gospel, there is this a sense of wanting to share something great, something awesome with another person. And as Lauren pointed out in her kids' talk, the method used was those 3 simple words: come and see. So in the gospel today, we hear of Jesus travelling north to Galilee, and he encounters Philip. And Philip goes on and calls Nathanael. And so we're in the early stages of Epiphany, and we have the calling of the disciples story. And so the mix-up that you saw earlier today, next week is when Andrew and Simon get called. And Simon being renamed Peter, Petros. So today it's Philip and Nathanael. Next week is Andrew and Simon. And so we're having these stories of Jesus gathering together his core team, his disciples. And so he's in Galilee and he sees Philip, and Philip is obviously moved by the experience, and he goes and calls Nathanael. And we read that Nathanael is a good person, a righteous Jew, an Israelite in whom there is no deceit. And yet he is not easily convinced. And we might, if you just think of a parallel with ourselves, we probably, and I know I do, you may know people who are good people, solid people, salt of the earth kind of people, wouldn't do harm or wrong to anybody. And yet that they are not easily convinced either about who Jesus is. So Nathanael, in a sense, is a little bit like this person. And he's a bit pessimistic or skeptic. He's like, Philip says, I found, the person that Moses is writing about and the prophets. Come and see Jesus, son of Joseph, from Nazareth. And Nathanael's like skeptical kind of response. Can anything good come out of Nazareth? It's kind of like saying, can anything good come out of Maryborough? I'm just bringing it close to home. Obviously, lots of good comes out of Maryborough. I was going to say Gympie, but Barry's not here. So who else is from Gympie? Is Margaret here today? I mean, not Gympie. I was being a little bit further. Can any good come out of wherever? So Nathanael is quite pessimistic about it. And Philip's response, again, is not to try and convince him. It's not to he doesn't say, oh, this Jesus bloke knows all this about the scriptures and you really, he's amazing. He doesn't say, tries to talk about how Jesus, there's something about the personality and that just moved him. He doesn't try and convince Nathanael. He just uses 3 simple words. Come and see. It's a bit like if you were, if you had gone to see like Hamilton or another theatrical play and you loved it, you wanted to share it with other people. It's hard, or certainly would be for me, to kind of convey what it is about it that moved me enough to want to share it with you. But one of the best things is you got to see it. Go and see it. Make up your own mind. Philip doesn't try and even argue against that can anything good come from Nazareth. He doesn't say, there's lots of people who come from Nazareth who are good. You remember Joe and you remember Jack and John, and he doesn't do any of that. He just says, come and see. And the very next line that we read in the Gospel, we know that Nathanael accepted the invite. Because the next line says, when Jesus saw Nathanael coming towards him. So whatever method Philip used worked. It's an example for us today. And whilst Nathanael still had his initial doubts, it's the encounter with Jesus, not the encounter with Philip, that ultimately convinces him. Because it's ultimately once he meets Jesus and he talks with Jesus that he says, you are the Son of God, you are the King of Israel. It's not Philip, his eloquence and his convincing arguments, it's his invitation. And it's Nathanael's encounter with God that convinces him. And that's just a wonderful model for us in the church today. For us to use, to invite people, not to invite people to St. John's to encounter St. John's, the community here. We're inviting people to St. John's, in this tradition, in this place, to encounter God. And there's something liberating about it, because it's not the onus, the responsibility doesn't rest on our shoulders, just like it didn't rest on Philip's shoulders to convince Nathanael that Jesus is God. That was up to Jesus. And for us, to convince people of the risen Christ, ultimately it's a relationship through the Holy Spirit. So we have a role to play in calling people and being the community of faith. And like Lauren said, often it's not our words but our actions that help people to develop their relationship with God or to encounter God through us, but it is the Holy Spirit that grows that relationship. Our role in the process is to invite people, come and see. There's a professor from the Lutheran Seminary in Minnesota, Michael Rognes, and he wrote this, so I'll read it. Without doubt, there was something about Jesus that drew people to him. When we read the Gospels, we note the profound effect Jesus has when he meets people. And then Michael goes on to list a number of examples, which I'll share some. From Matthew's Gospel, the Canaanite woman. Mark's Gospel, the blind man at Bethsaida. From Luke's Gospel, the Roman centurion, the woman at the Pharisee's house, Zacchaeus. From John's Gospel, the woman at the well, the sick man at the Bethesda pool. We also know of the thief on the cross next to Jesus and the centurion at the foot of the cross. These are just some encounters where, some examples where the encounter with Jesus transformed the person's life. Numerous examples. And for us in the church, it's the encounter with the risen Christ and the Holy Spirit that transforms people's lives. And that's how the church has operated for 2,000 years. People are transformed in their encounter, and they then go out and invite people to experience the same thing. So I don't believe our task necessarily as Christians is to prove the truth of the Christian faith. Many theologians have written about different arguments and proofs for the existence of God. We need to live our faith. I don't think necessarily that we are to prove the existence of the truth of the Christian faith. I don't know if our task is to even persuade others to become Christian. And we've seen over the millennia where religion has been imposed on others. But I do believe our task as Christians is, like Philip, to invite others to encounter the risen Christ just as we have encountered the risen Christ, and to use those simple words, come and see. And we can use that for here as well. And we're not necessarily calling people to St. John's, to the 9 o'clock community. Thanks, Finn. We're not necessarily calling people to the 9 o'clock community just so that we can swell our numbers, so that we can fill our offertory plate, so that I can take more leave. We're not calling people to St. John's. We are calling people to encounter, to have a personal experience with God. That may not be for them at 9 o'clock. That might be at the 7 o'clock style service or the 6 p.m. service. It might not even be at St. John's. It might be at the Baptist church or the Catholic church. Because we're not about growing empires. It's about growing the kingdom. And it's about something more than ourselves. It's about drawing people so they can have an experience with God. And from that experience, the kingdom will grow. Don't get me wrong. I think this is a wonderful, amazing community. And I would be delighted if we could grow our congregation and if people came to find an experience with God here, in this place, with this community. But that's not necessarily what we are on about. We are on about growing God's kingdom. And that begins with offering invitations to other people to come and see. Not to convince them, not to persuade them, not to cajole them, but to invite them. And let the Holy Spirit do the heavy lifting. So I began with a question about these wax jumbas or something, whatever they're called. I encourage you, if you come across one, to experience it. It wasn't a bad experience, just wouldn't be my preference for fruit. But it's still an experience that I did enjoy having. So that's your homework. And the other homework is to look for encounters in our lives, in the world today, where you might have the opportunity to say to another person, why don't you come and see? Invite them. Come and see. Come and experience the Holy Spirit at St. John's. Or, if you're from another church and you're up visiting, inviting them to your home church. Because that is one of our core missions. We are all called, empowered, and sent. And we're sent to live a Christian life and to grow the kingdom, and that begins, as the example of Philip, by calling others to come and see, to invite them. So that's your challenge, looking for those opportunities where you may invite someone to church. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.